Welcome to another Scotland Then episode. In this episode, I'll be highlighting newspaper stories from February and May 1970, at the time of taxi driver George Martin's murder and trial. Before we get started, I'd just love to give a shout out to our newest Patreon members. Today's Tiger, Shelley M, James Murdoch and Kimberly Ross. Thank you. We really do appreciate you and all of our Patreon members for your continued support. And please know that any support you do give does go back into the podcast, such as Lavaliers, which has been great because it's allowed me and Marty to capture the recording that we recently did at Airdrie Library, or various subscriptions or experts, which all helps me release episodes that little bit quicker and more consistently. Or even any feedback and suggestions you have of what you like or don't like about the episodes of Scottish Murders. It all helps just continue to improve Scottish Murders. If you would like to become a Scottish Murders Patreon member too, then the link will be in the show notes. Okay, let's go back to 1970 Scotland. So, the first article that I noticed in the Scotsman on the 17th of February 1970 was headed, Detectives Follow Up Clue from Clairvoyant. This caught my eye for a couple of reasons. One being because I remembered having read about this somewhere before, and secondly, when I noticed the name Pat McAdam. Back in June 2022, we released our Linked or Not Linked episodes. If you've not listened to them already, then go and check them out. But in part 1, we mentioned a man called Thomas Ross Young, who in 1967 had not only received an 18-month prison sentence, but had also been questioned by police following the disappearance of a 17-year-old girl. Now, as the Linked or Not Linked episodes were to highlight Angus Sinclair's known and potential other victims, I didn't go into detail about the disappearance of the 17-year-old girl in 1967, but her name was Pat McAdam. So when I saw her name again in this article, it triggered a memory. Pat McAdam's disappearance is actually a case I've been meaning to cover for some time, but I just hadn't got around to it. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here, as I plan on covering the disappearance of Pat McAdam before the end of August. But briefly, the article in February 1970, 3 years after Pat had disappeared, said that Dutch clairvoyant Gerard Quasi had forecast that a dress would be found on a banking by the River Milk near Dalton in Dumfriesshire. And despite this being an area that had previously been combed by police and dogs in the time since Pat had gone missing, upon a search taking place, the police did in fact find a tattered, long-sleeved grey cotton dress, a stocking, and what could have been the remains of a handbag. However, any hope that this was an important clue in Pat McAdam's case was soon dashed when Pat's mum, Mary, was asked if she could identify the dress as having been worn by Pat at the time of her disappearance. As her mum said, absolutely not, as the last time her daughter had been seen alive, she had been wearing a short-sleeved black cocktail dress. Now, this case doesn't end there. There is a lot more to it. And like I said, I hope to have this episode out by the end of August. Now, I've heard a lot of people saying in my time how it wasn't like that in my day. Well, according to an article in the St Andrews Citizen on the 28th of February 1970, even back in that day, they were having problems, with the article headings being Town Hall Dances Suspended, Terror on Streets on Saturdays, and Hooliganism Reaches New Peaks. So I guess it turns out every era has its problems. So let me tell you what happened on the streets in February 1970. The town hall dances in St Andrews were suspended for 4 weeks after a wave of hooliganism and vandalism plagued the streets on Saturday nights. Despite the well-behaved crowds inside the hall, incidents escalated outside, culminating in smashed windows at MacArthur's Cafe, damage to public lavatories, milk bottles being thrown through house windows, and violent street fights that left at least one youth seriously injured. Police did make several arrests, including at the bus station and guard bridge, with fines being handed out for breach of the peace. Weapons were also confiscated, such as a wheel brace, and young girls that were intoxicated before 8 p.m. were refused entry to the dances. Much of the trouble apparently stemmed from outsiders arriving by bus, particularly youths coming from Dundee or from Met Hill after football matches, and bus crews clashed with dancers trying to reach trains from Lookers Junction. Local officials debated the future of the dances, with some urging cancellation to prevent further harm, while others insisted that they shouldn't surrender to the rowdy few. Ultimately, though, the council agreed to halt the dances temporarily for 4 weeks and re-evaluate the situation then. It's always those few who spoil it for the rest. Okay, so it would also appear that housebreaking and home invasions, particularly in Dundee, was on the rise, and it would appear that 24-year-old John Hutton was to be made an example of, according to an article in the Scotsman on the 20th of May. 24-year-old John Hutton of Perth Road in Dundee was sentenced to 7 years in prison at the High Court in Dundee after being found guilty of assault and robbery, his 20th conviction. The attack took place on the 15th of February when John Hutton forced his way into the home of pensioners Ian and Isabel Meany of Ford's Lane, Dundee, assaulting them and robbing Mrs. Meany of £1 and 12 shillings. 2 other men charged alongside John Hutton failed to appear in court, and warrants were issued for their arrest. Lord Robertson, delivering the sentence, condemned the violent home invasion as outrageous, stressing that such crimes have become alarmingly common and must be stamped out. Despite John Hutton's claim that he was merely walking nearby when he was apprehended, witness accounts and police intervention led to his conviction. In a separate case heard the same day, also at the High Court in Dundee, 27-year-old David Leslie was given a 2-year prison sentence for attempted housebreaking, which he admitted to in court. And the prison sentences continued when, according to an article in the Brecon Advertiser on the 19th of February 1970, 22-year-old Brian Gilhooly, who was a waiter at the Glenesk Hotel, was sentenced to 3 months in prison after he pleaded guilty to a violent assault on 16-year-old receptionist Joyce Keller. The incident occurred in the hotel's staff room when an intoxicated Brian Gilhooly accused colleagues of stealing a beer he himself had taken. In the confrontation, he smashed a pint tumbler and struck Joyce Keller on the neck with a broken glass. At the Forfar Sheriff Court, it was described how the glass pierced Joyce Keller's neck, narrowly missing her jugular vein, leaving her covered in blood and with a severe wound. Brian Gilhooly, who had one previous conviction, claimed that the act stemmed from a deep sense of loneliness. Sheriff Ford expressed hope that the custodial sentence, backdated to the 31st of January, would help Brian Gilhooly learn self-control. Another prison sentence being handed out, according to an article in the Scotsman on the 20th of May, was to 28-year-old George Jameson of Johnston Terrace in Edinburgh when he admitted at the High Court in Edinburgh to the murder of 19-year-old Phyllis Telford. The court heard how on the night of the 6th or 7th of February, George Jameson violently assaulted Phyllis Telford, who was described as a woman of easy virtue, during a night out, where he had grabbed her by the throat, forcibly removed her clothing, kicked and stamped on her before strangling her with a pullover. Phyllis's body was found on waste ground below Castle Rock, having been left there to die after being attacked. George Jameson's trial date had been set, however at the last minute he changed his plea to guilty and subsequently only made a brief 4-minute court appearance, where he was sentenced to life imprisonment. This next story got me thinking of a couple of things. 1, would I even recognise my own car if I wasn't driving it? Bear with me. And 2, what would I do if I did see my car being driven by someone I didn't know? Well, here's what a young Edinburgh woman did when she saw her car being driven along the street by someone that she didn't know. It was a typical Tuesday morning in early March 1970 for 25-year-old Irene Dixon. She left her home in Warrender Park Road, south of Edinburgh, and made the 16-minute drive to Regent Terrace, where she parked her car and walked the short distance to her work. At lunchtime, she headed out for a walk and to get something to eat, and she was happily walking in Waterloo Place when she saw her own car being driven past her by a stranger. Noticing that the traffic lights were turning red and the car was slowing down, Irene ran towards the car, and she jumped in front of it before it could be driven away. She then noticed that the driver was trying to get out of the car, and so, while calling for help from passers-by, she got to the driver's door and prevented the driver from getting out, while others stopped him driving away until the police arrived and the car thief was arrested. Irene later said that up until she had seen her own car driving past her, she had absolutely no idea that it had even been stolen. At Edinburgh Sheriff Court, John Stewart of Newton Grange pleaded guilty to stealing the car, driving without insurance, and the reset of a vehicle licence plate. But his agent went on to say that the accused's own car had been in a crash, and that he thought that he must have been drunk when he took the car. They went on to say that the accused's car was the same make as the car he had stolen, and that he had apparently got access to and had been able to drive Irene's car away by using his own car keys. It was noted that John Stewart had no previous convictions, and his sentencing was deferred for a year. I'm not sure why it was deferred for so long, maybe to see if he committed any further offences before he was sentenced. I'm not sure. So, if you had been Irene, would you have recognised your own car? And would you have acted so quickly and been able to prevent your car actually being stolen? Me, I think I'd have to answer no to both questions, but you just never know. And finally, some statistics, with a heading from the Scotsman on the 17th of February 1970 reading, biggest rise in population since 1962/1963. According to the Registrar General for Scotland's annual estimates, Scotland's population rose by 7,200 in the year leading up to June 1969, reaching 5,194,700. Which was the highest annual increase since 1962/63. Despite this overall growth, the four major cities, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee and Aberdeen, collectively lost 18,800 residents due to planning overspill, movement to new towns and suburban migration. And, according to the County Medical Officer of Health, Shetland saw a slight decline to 17,122, but the decrease was less than previous years. Large and small boroughs also saw gains, with Paisley topping the large boroughs at 95,182 and Cumbernauld leading among small boroughs at 26,678. Meanwhile, county landward areas experienced a net gain of 5,700, and new town populations continued to grow steadily, with East Kilbride at 62,900 and Irvine at 38,200. The population breakdown showed 2.7 million females and 2.49 million males, and the under 15 age group amounted to 1.36 million. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Scotland Then. I certainly love researching the newspaper stories from back then for each episode. Next week will be another Scotland Then episode, this time from 1981, around the time Aileen Printy was murdered, and the following week I hope to release the Pat McAdam episode. If you have enjoyed this episode and do enjoy listening to Scottish Murders, it would mean so much if you could please rate or review. It really does help others find Scottish Murders. So until next time, I've been your host, Dawn.
Scottish Murders is a production of Clurinton.